All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started here today. Is everybody able to hear me okay? All right, excellent. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to have you here. My name is Peter Groth. I'm the CEO of Dyslexia Connect Online Tutoring, and we provide online dyslexia tutoring to children, teenagers, and adults. And we've been doing that for about 10 years. And I can introduce my guest here today. It's going to be speaking and doing the dyslexia simulation. So her name is Nancy Harrison, and Nancy has been working with individuals with dyslexia for 15 years. Nancy actually has dyslexia, so in addition to her extensive study of the topic, she can also relate directly to the experience of having dyslexia. Nancy owned and managed a tutoring center for students with dyslexia where she trained tutors, served as an advocate for students and their families, and screened students for dyslexia. She is currently the assistant head of school at the New Vista School in Lynchburg, Virginia. New Vista School is a private day school whose motto is, "Some students learn differently, we teach differently." So I will go ahead and let Nancy get started here, and then she will take it away from there.
Thanks, Peter. Do you want to talk about questions?
Oh, yes. Thank you for the reminder. Yes. So for questions today, to keep this the flow going well and make it easy for people to ask questions, we'll have you put your questions in the chat box, and we will either address those during the presentation if it's easy for us to do so, or at the end of the presentation if it's easier to do that way. So yeah, you can just go ahead and write your questions in the chat box, and then we will address those. I also wanted to mention, if you are a teacher and you're looking for professional development hours from this, you can either send me a message on Facebook after the event if you haven't done so already, and just provide me with your email address, and I will be able to send you a certificate showing that you attended here today. Or you can also email us from our online contact form at dyslexiaconnect.com and just mention that you attended the event and you would like a certificate of participation. We'd be happy to provide that. Yeah. All right, great. Well, Nancy, go right ahead when you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Peter. This is a new experience to do the simulation over the internet. So I'm excited to see how this is gonna turn out. I want to give you a disclaimer from the beginning here. What you are going to experience is not what a person with dyslexia sees. Rather, it is a simulation of what a person with dyslexia experiences. Those feelings, the frustrations, the timidity, and the insecurities. It's going to be a little different because you're in your homes and there's no one around you to give you some of that feedback, but I think you'll get the idea of what it must feel like for a student sitting in a classroom. We have 134 people here. So imagine you're in a classroom with even 5 other people, and how scary that can be. So looking at the screen now, I assume you all can tell that this is a pen, right? If I turn it this way, now what is it? It's still a pen. And now it's still a pen. What do you see here? Hopefully you see the letter B. And now it's a D. Now a P. And now it's a Q. All of those letters are the very same shape. They mean something different depending on how they are arranged on a piece of paper. You can see my necklace here. I don't know if you can tell what it is, but it's a symbol of dyslexia, and it looks like a B, D, a P, and a Q. My earrings too. And it's kind of becoming a symbol for dyslexia because those are the letters that students really struggle with. Sometimes they'll struggle with M and W because of the flip of that letter. So look out for those things. Just because a student gets those things backwards doesn't necessarily mean they have dyslexia, but it's really important to understand that those people are not seeing them any differently. They just can't remember which one's a B and which one's a D. So I want you to read what I put up on the screen. All of you are muted, so you can read it out loud. And each line I'm going to put up, as soon as I put it up, I want you to move to that next line, okay? So read this, read it out loud if you're in a place where you can. If not, read it silently. All right. A little harder than if we were in a classroom. I would have you do the round robin reading, and you would read it out loud in front of your peers. And if you're reading the first one that's blue, you're a typical reader. After mowing the lawn, Dad asked Paula to help rake the yard. Then the second person's going to read in the green. And what in the world does that say? A typical reader just kind of doesn't know. This is what it might be like to read out loud in front of your peers if you have severe dyslexia. The next one is the gold. That would be a mild dyslexia case, and so on. As I progressed through the sentences, you may have had that feeling of, I didn't get to finish the sentence before that. Think about what the feelings were that you experienced. This is what the story actually is. After mowing the lawn, Dad asked Paula to help rake the yard. Just rake up the clippings and put them in the compost pile. Paul was eager to help Dad. That should be Paula, sorry. Paul was eager to help Dad, but the yard was really big and he wanted to go to Peggy's house to play kickball. So Paul went inside to ask his brother, Bobby, to help him. Paul said, "You get the rake, I will get the bucket to put the clippings in." Bobby ran to the shed to find the rake. It was right where he had remembered it being. Together, the boys got the job done. The compost pile was full. Dad was happy, and the boys got to go to Peggy's house for a fun game of kickball. Well, if you are the person reading in the red and in the green, and the whole page is that jumbled mess of letters, are you going to understand this story? You are not going to be able to comprehend. You might know every word on that page, but when it's all put together and it's jumbled up, you can make no sense of it. Going along with that, you have your peers around you who can read without any problem. And even as I read that to you, as Peter mentioned, I have dyslexia. I stumbled over words. I stumble over words a lot. I read to my students every day and I stumble over words. Some of them correct me daily. So it's a lifelong struggle. But I want you to get that feeling, that angst. Peter has on YouTube some great videos that you can watch to learn more about dyslexia. He has one that talks about the degrees of dyslexia. Dyslexia can be mild. It may go unnoticed. It's where you get some letters backwards. You might say the word saw instead of the word was, for instance. Or like I did in reading that to you, leave off endings of words or put endings on to words that aren't actually there. Moderate to severe dyslexia often is noticed, but it's undiagnosed. Those students are the ones we look at and think something is different, but I can't quite put my finger on it. this student is really smart, but he can't spell. Or this student is really smart, but she's reading 3 grades below grade level. What is up with that? And we can't quite understand it. Then you have the severe to profound person with dyslexia. That may go undiagnosed. It may go diagnosed, but the wrong intervention is often used. They might put them in a reading program at school that has every intention of helping them read, but it's not the exact kind of intervention that a student with dyslexia needs. So think about what you experienced. And if you want to type in some of the things that you experienced while you were going through that, I could see some of you were actually reading it out loud. And maybe if you're like I am, when you got to that second sentence, you just didn't try to read it because it made no sense. So you just skipped it. But I want to know, what do you experience during that time? What did you learn about your child or your student or even yourself during that simulation? And can you think of ways to help a student or a child or even yourself who may have some of these feelings during school? And what accommodations might help a student who struggles this way?
I have some interesting comments, Nancy.
Oh, good.
Somebody said, "Oh, it made me tear up immediately." Trying to do that. Somebody else says they just wanted to give up.
Sure.
The moment they started trying to read that. Kept trying to read and understand what I was reading, yet confused. I gasped and gave up. So yeah, a lot of frustration, frustration and just difficulty.
Yeah, and I have done this for large groups of teachers before, and I have had teachers get angry with me and put their heads down and say, "I'm not doing it." And that's exactly what our students do. If you're a teacher, that's exactly what your students may experience every day. If you're a mom, a dad, that may be what your child is experiencing every day in school. And we're asking them to do what hurts the most and what's hardest for 6 to 7 hours a day, and then go home and do some more just for fun, right? So it's challenging, it's hard. So we need to equip them. Some accommodations, one right off the bat would be, don't ask that child to read out loud unless it's in a very secure one-on-one situation with a trusted adult, because peers can be brutal, and some adults can be brutal if they don't understand. And I was guilty myself as a classroom teacher who did not understand dyslexia. I remember one student in particular, I can still see his face, and I want to go back to him. I have no idea how to get in touch with him, but I want to go back to him and say, "I'm really sorry. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help you." And somebody said they teared up, and I feel that way right now because the struggle is so very real. I want you to understand that dyslexia is not seeing backwards. It's not a problem with the eyes. It is a disconnect in the processing of language in the brain. The prefix dys is a Greek prefix that means trouble with, and lexia, language or words. So this is a disconnect. This is a problem with words. Here's another thing I want you to do. I have a calendar over here and I have to think about left and right on the left side of your screen. And I want you to spend, I'm not going to give you a whole minute, but a little bit of time to answer the questions there using that calendar. So we can very quickly see how many years are represented on this calendar. Very easy, 2, 4, 6. 6 years are represented. On what day of the week is Christmas 2024? We can go very quickly and see that it is on a Wednesday. That didn't take long at all. I could go through those. It wouldn't even take me a whole minute to answer those questions. And this is what a typical learner's brain functions like. It's a manageable task. However, now I've given you the same information, and I've even written on each month the year for you. Now I want you to answer the same questions. Do we know how many years are represented here? Only if we can do the math at the top of the page. On what day of the week is Christmas 2024? I have no idea. I don't know where it is. I'm looking over there. I don't see December. I first have to know that Christmas is in December. I have to know that it's on December the 25th. I can't find all of that information with what I have right there. And that is what someone with dyslexia, that's the way their brain might process information. We hear a lot about executive functioning in school. That's the organization of materials, the organization of information in our brains. And this is what someone with dyslexia, their brain may be jumbled like that. But if we go back and organize it that way, it's very easy to get the information. But we have to understand that in the dyslexia brain, it's not organized that way. The brain of a dyslexic person is jumbled. There are disconnects. I have to be very methodical in the way I organize my time, my space, because I get very confused. I miss directions. I still don't know my left from my right. If somebody gives me directions, I have to look at my hands to determine which way is left and which way is right. I'm 53 years old. I should know my left from my right by now. And I don't know that I ever will. And I'll tell you, I'm trying to learn how to back up a trailer. It's next to impossible. It is very, very difficult for me. So keep that in mind as you're working with someone that you know is struggling. They have all the information. It just might take them a bit longer to process it and give you the answer. So was that last one a manageable task? It's really not until it's organized. And why is it unmanageable? What you need to understand is that all students have the same access to the information, but they process it differently. So what would need to be done before that assignment is completed? Well, I would have to take all of those pieces and put them out for the student, or give them the time and the resources to do it on their own. A lot of it is just about time and letting them chunk the information into manageable tasks. Would it be difficult to persevere when your friends have all finished and you've not even answered the first question? They get all the information, you don't. And so like some of you said, I just gave up. Just gave up. And so we try to hide behind somebody in class. We try to not make eye contact with the teacher because she might call on us. We have all of these ways to avoid. A person with dyslexia typically is really smart, and they find ways around the system because the system is broken for them. So here's what I want you to do now. If you have a piece of paper and a pen, I want you to just sign your name on that piece of paper. If you don't, just pretend on a flat surface. Just sign your name. Now, with your right foot on the floor, move your foot in a clockwise circle. Keep moving that, just get that rhythm going. Keep moving your foot in a clockwise circle. With your foot still moving in a clockwise circle, sign your name as you did before. I can see some smiles. I can see some laughter. It's not happening, is it? I get it. I get it. It looks a mess. Our brains are made to do one cognitive thing at a time. If you have dyslexia, reading is a very cognitive skill. On top of that, if you have dysgraphia, which means the trouble with writing, you're asking your brain to do 2 cognitive things at a time. And you can't, you simply cannot do it. So a student who is trying to listen, read, and write all at the same time simply can't do it. I only know one person who can do multiple cognitive things at a time. And that's my daughter. And she can read a whole book, have a conversation, watch a movie all at the same time, and do them all well. I don't know. She's a freak of nature, I suppose, but she's able to do that. I don't know anybody else who can. That simulation right there gives you the idea of what it feels like for someone that struggles with handwriting to be asked to go faster. Go a little bit faster. You know these letters, write these words. They can't remember which way, when you were doing that, you couldn't remember which way to your pen went, right? It's very, very challenging. And all I was asking you to do is write your name. You know your name. You've written it thousands of times. These students know these words, but to put them under that pressure, they cannot perform. So dysgraphia often accompanies dyslexia, though not always. So not only is the student struggling to read and comprehend, he may also be struggling to form the letters required to write a sentence or even just a word. This is a really interesting website to go to. If you just go to understood.org, and I think you can search, once you're on their website, search this, but you can type in the things that you know your child personally struggles with, and they can make a simulation for you. And it might be really helpful if you have a student, a child who suffers with dyslexia, maybe share this with that student's teacher or their group of teachers so that everybody can understand what that student is struggling with. Peter, what kind of questions do we have?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Great presentation. Let me go to our chat box here and see questions we have. We did have a question about whether this will be recorded, and we are recording it, and it will be posted to our Facebook page sometime in the next couple of days, once we can just get it cleaned up a little bit, edited and put on there. So yeah, so we will be posting this to YouTube and our Facebook page. Let me see. We had a question about Dyslexia Connect's website. It looks like somebody answered it, but if you are looking for that, our website is dyslexiaconnect.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well. We have accounts with that if you want to follow us. Let's see. Okay. All right. So you have a question about intervention. So what about intervention? Does that change the degree or severity? So the question is asking whether intervention changes the degree or whether it,
That's a great way to ask a question.
Yeah.
It allows the student to manage a little bit better. It gives them the tools in their tool belt to learn how to decode, which is read words, break them into syllables. It teaches them syllable types, closed syllables and what sounds those vowels make and all of that. It also allows them to encode, which is the spelling portion of reading and writing. So to read it and to write it. So it does not change the severity of the dyslexia. What you're born with, you'll always have. I taught one student who always told me that dyslexia was his constant companion. And some days he loved it and some days he hated it. And but it's always going to be there. I'm always going to struggle with my left and right. I was taught my left and right from the time I was a tiny child. That has not changed my brain to work it. However, there have been MRIs that have proven that the right intervention can rewire the brain. So the person with dyslexia uses the right side of their brain to process because that's the side of their brain that's stronger. We're made to process language on the left side of our brain. And the Orton Gillingham is the kind of intervention that is needed. That kind of tutoring and intervention, if it's done and with fidelity, really can change the way the brain is firing, so that you're using the super highway rather than the backcountry roads to get to reading. So I hope that answers your question. It's not going to change the severity, but it will allow you to read better and spell better.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a very typical question about dyslexia. You know, Nancy mentioned the fact of whether you have it for your entire life or not. And sometimes when you're on the internet and different sites and things, you might see a story about somebody who says they got rid of dyslexia, or they had dyslexia until they were 15 and then they got rid of it. And unfortunately that doesn't happen. So you can get intervention, and like Nancy was saying, that drastically changes the outcomes for the positive. But an individual who has dyslexia will have it for their entire life.
Right.
So yeah, thanks, Nancy. Let me look at our next questions here. So okay. Oh, a lot of great responses. Thanks for your responses about the frustration you were feeling, everybody, when we were doing the simulation. That's you know, very much like students with dyslexia are going to feel when they're trying to read material.
Another, while you're reading through some of those, Peter, another thing that students with dyslexia really struggle with is vocabulary. I can give, let's say we're studying geometry. I was subbing in a geometry class this week, and we were working with polyhedrons. Well, if I know what the different parts of the word mean, then I can figure out the meaning of the word. So poly meaning many, and so I can figure it out. But if we just think that we can give geometry terms, for instance, once, and the kids are going to get it, or they're not. And so we have to remind and remind and remind and remind. And they're not going to want to use the words, but we need to force them to actually use the vocabulary words in everyday conversation. In math class, in geometry class, you need to use those geometric terms. In algebra class, it is like a whole nother language when you're talking about these different functions and all of that. It's a whole other language. So keep that in mind as you are expecting things out of students. Also, there are three times that students often hit brick walls: third grade, sixth grade, and ninth grade. In third grade, students are typically learning to read multi-syllable words. So that's a brick wall. If you have dyslexia, you're not going to do well there. Then in sixth grade, you are still reading in your language arts classes on a sixth grade level, but your other reading material, your history, your sciences, are on a much higher level because of those really big words. If you have like in the Emancipation Proclamation, think about all of the syllables that are in that. Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah.
I can't read it one time. Every time I come across it, I'm going to have to break it up into syllables. It's exhausting.
That is a really great point. So we got a question from Owen. He was asking if he can do anything himself to support a 12-year-old boy trying to read. And Owen, I would say a really great site, Nancy actually posted understood.org. They have a lot of different things about how to support kids with dyslexia at home. You might want to check them out because they offer a lot of good advice and also have a lot of great info about the background facts about dyslexia, and some helpful sites that you can visit as well. Let me see if we can find some other questions. Okay. So we have a question about someone asked about putting their son in French immersion in school starting next year in grade 6 when he has no French language exposure. We live in a bilingual province in Canada. French as a second language is very important here. However, I'm worried since he struggles as much as he does with dyslexia and his other learning disabilities. So would you like to address a question about trying to learn foreign languages, Nancy, with dyslexia and the challenges?
Sure, and you pipe in too, Peter.
Good.
If I have dyslexia in my native language, I'm going to have dyslexia in every language.
Yeah.
It's not language specific. Now, it's not as noticed in languages like Chinese or Japanese because they use symbols rather than letters. And so that it's more picture based for reading. I did tell a student one time, I don't think you should take a foreign language. He really wanted to take French. He ended up in the French Honor Society. He did so well in it. So I really shy away from saying don't ever try it.
Sure.
If it's an immersion program, I think that's a little easier. But just keep in mind that he might be able to speak it, but writing it, he's still going to struggle with the spelling. So spelling should not be counted because he's not going to be able to understand the differences and I don't know French, but I know that their spelling is way different from ours. If he's learning how to spell in English, those challenges are going to multiply when it comes to a foreign language. What are your thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just reinforce everything you just said. And, one of the difficult things, or things we notice with students who have dyslexia is a lot of difficulty learning phonics. And that's part of the reason why we focus so much on phonics in tutoring. For that reason, it's generally very difficult for them to learn phonics and phonetic rules in another language, since that's something that's very affected by dyslexia. It can be challenging for them to do it even in their native language. But when they start getting phonics in another language, it's often difficult for them to acquire that. And then sometimes what we've seen is that they actually end up mixing up the two. When they're trying to read and spell, they might end up mixing up the phonetic rules, for example, for French with English when they're trying to spell in English. So that is something that we've run into for sure. And like Nancy said, you don't want to discourage somebody from trying, but if you do end up going that route and you see those difficulties, it's probably related to the dyslexia specifically.
And I would definitely let the teacher know challenge.
Yeah.
Just so they're aware.
Yeah, absolutely. So that they're aware of the situation for sure. We've got another question. Do you use a remediation strategy or just accommodations?
I always recommend a remediation. And Peter's tutors actually do this, as well as accommodations. The accommodations are going to help the student get through. The remediation is going to actually change how they read and write. So Orton-Gillingham is a system of hands-on, multi-sensory, a very systematic approach to learning, reading, and writing. And there are lots of different Orton-Gillingham based programs out there that are actually good. Peter, you may want to chime in because you have the tutoring program.
Sure. Yeah. I would say the same thing. We definitely recommend remediation because accommodations can help a student keep up and get their work done. But what's really going to make the most difference is actually providing remediation that will help them learn how to read better and to spell better as well. So as Nancy was saying, in our experience, Orton-Gillingham or any of the methods that are in the Orton-Gillingham family are really the most effective for helping a student learn to read properly who has dyslexia. And the great thing is Orton-Gillingham has been around for, I think maybe 60 or 70 years now. So that has a very, very long track record of being very successful in helping students. And so if you're looking for dyslexia tutoring, I would advise going with the tutor who's trained either in Orton-Gillingham or one of the closely related methods like Barton, Wilson, Slingerland. There are some others as well. The fortunate thing about all these methods in the family is that they share the same basic philosophy. And so they're all highly effective for helping students with dyslexia learn to read and spell.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually the system was designed back in the 30s when Samuel Orton, who was a neuropsychologist, maybe even, was he a neuropsychologist or neurosurgeon? See, now I can't remember.
Oh yeah, it was one of the two. Yeah, one of the two. I'm not sure either.
And he was trying to help someone who had a brain injury. And he was working with the malleability of the brain and got together with Anna Gillingham, who was a teacher, and decided if I can teach someone with a brain injury how to read, why can't I teach someone who struggled from the very beginning to read? How come I can't teach them how to read too? And so they combined, and that's how we get Orton Gillingham's with Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham combined as a doctor and an educator to help these kids.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting story. I actually worked with an individual who had a stroke, in fact, at one point, and Orton Gillingham is also used for people who have had strokes. And it was very interesting. He pretty much entirely lost his ability to recognize letters and to be able to read words. So his speech was still very good, but he lost his ability to read. And at that point, I had already been working with students who have dyslexia for probably about 10 years, but it was fascinating to work with somebody who had had a stroke because I knew the history of Orton Gillingham and where it came out of originally. So yeah, it was just great to see how effective it was and see him make so much progress. All right, so maybe we'll go on to some other questions here. Nancy, I want to let you know if you have to head out. I know we were set a half an hour originally, so if you need to check out.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, sounds good. And everyone else attending here, we realize that we're just running a little bit over with questions, and we'll just continue to answer those as long as we can. But if you need to head out for any reason, we will be posting the video of all of this on the Facebook page. So let's see, we have a question. What age do we make the difference between confusion with letters and actual dyslexia? My child is 6 and seems to be struggling more than her peers, but several teachers say it's too early to say.
Again, Peter, chime in, but I can screen a child after they have had enough information in the language. So I will not screen a child until they have gone halfway through kindergarten, which is usually 5.5 or 6. But once they've gone halfway through kindergarten, they should have been exposed to all the letters and the sounds. And I can screen a child then to see, and I do a series of about 12 tests. Some are informal, some are formal, to go to look about, do I think this child has dyslexia and to what degree? So it's not too early, and the earlier that you intervene, the easier it is on the child in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And there's been a lot said over the past number of years about the policy of not testing students until they're maybe 9, 10 years old. And that approach has been criticized sometimes because it's seen as waiting until a child fails, at a point where they really are several years behind and having so much trouble reading, and they're starting to suffer self-esteem issues because they feel like they're not keeping up with their peers. And so it definitely is possible to see the signs much earlier than that. So I'd also say parents tend to have very good intuition about if their child is struggling with something. So if you feel like something's just not quite right or your child might be struggling, I'd encourage you to look into it more and do all the research you can and seek out resources, because typically when a parent thinks there's something going on, there's something going on. So I would suggest go with your intuition on that.
And as a teacher, I can tell you that until recently, teachers did not know about the signs of dyslexia. We were not taught about what dyslexia is, even though about 10% of the population has it. We didn't know. And now it's required that teachers going into the profession have some background on dyslexia, what it looks like, how it presents. So actually it's higher than 10. No, what is it? 10%? One in 5 people
for dyslexia.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've heard estimates all the way up to
20?
1 in 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was anywhere from 10 to 20%. So
yeah,
it's kind of varies depending on the level of dyslexia, but those are the estimates I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see if we have any other questions. What kinds of assistive tech would you recommend? That's a very good question.
That is a great question. And it changes so fast. There used to be pens, I think they still have them, smart pens that will record at the same time a teacher is giving a lecture, for instance. And if you just make a scribble on a page, then when you go back to that scribble and point to it or touch it, it will actually say back what is recorded. That's a great assistive technology. Speech to text is a great technology for students who struggle to write. There's an app called SnapType, which I really like. It takes, if a teacher gives a worksheet, for instance, it takes a picture of that worksheet, and then that you can put over top blank, you can just a text box and type in the answer. That's for a student that really struggles with dysgraphia.
Yeah.
And of course, Learning Ally, that's ear reading. A lot of people say if a child is ear reading, then they're not really reading, but I disagree with that. Yes, we want them to learn how to actually read the words on the page, but if they are struggling, we still want them to get the information at their age level and their maturity level.
Yeah.
We don't want it to be too watered down for them, so let them listen to it.
Absolutely. I was going to mention too, audiobooks are a great way to keep children with dyslexia interested in books while they're learning how to actually read better. So it kind of, helps them to keep on saying like, oh, this is really interesting. Yeah, I like books. I like books, because something that we notice sometimes is that when a student with dyslexia has a lot of trouble with reading, they get turned off to reading, so much so that they may actually physically turn away from books when they are put in front of them. And audiobooks are a great way to help them stay interested in books and realize that like, hey, I really love books actually, and I am learning to read them, and just stay on a more positive note with that. Yeah.
I know a lot of people struggle with homework, and this might be something that you and your struggle with. So one accommodation that I would really recommend, if a child is in first grade, if they give homework, there should be 10 minutes of homework. Second grade, 20 minutes of homework. Third grade, 30 minutes of homework, and so on until you get to sixth grade. It's going to change a little bit then. A child with dyslexia, after, if let's say it's a fourth grader, after you've worked for 40 minutes, that child is exhausted. He's worked harder than his typical learning peer has worked. You should be able to sign off on that homework, and he shouldn't have to spend 3 hours doing his homework. You need to make that arrangement with the teacher, spend 10 minutes on math, 10 minutes on reading, 10 minutes, and so on. Or have the teacher go ahead and take away some of the problems that they have to do in math, for instance, just because it's just too much. And we've asked them for 6 hours to do what's their very hardest thing. They don't need that much more when they get home.
Absolutely. Yeah, on the note of assisted tech, I was going to mention as well that website we mentioned, understood.org.
Yes.
They have lists of assistive technology, and it's great because, like Nancy was saying, it just changes constantly. And if you go to that website, they update their lists, I think, maybe a couple of times a year, or maybe even more than that. So you can get great lists that have all kinds of assistive technology on them, and they have reviews of them and how they work for children with different learning issues. So that's a great resource, because it's almost hard to keep track of all the assistive technology these days, just due to the large amount of it.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. I might have a chance for a few more questions here. Valerie asks, how do you know how severe dyslexia is? So maybe what degree of dyslexia a child has.
I don't know, Valerie, if you were there for the beginning of the simulation where I went through what dyslexia might feel like. So a student, if I'm just talking about reading, for instance, a student that is a typical reader would be reading like the blue, except for Paula should be Paul there. But if I'm looking at let's go to the yellow there, the third one down where it says Paul, it should be was eager to help dad. So you can see that was flipped. And so the person says saw, but meant to say was. The word help, they have that PD confusion there. So they might have little confusions within words, kick doll instead of kick ball. They might leave off endings of words, suffixes, for instance. They might leave out prepositions because who cares about a preposition? It's just a tiny little word. Really concentrating on the big words here. If you're reading the green lines, like the second one, they might run words together, might not be able to distinguish where a word begins and a word ends. They're going to have a lot more confusion. So it's going to look more like a foreign language the more severe your dyslexia is. The language is just not going to make sense. And I will determine, as I'm doing a screening of a child, I look for the severity of their mistakes. Are they always reversing letters? What about their numbers? Are they reversing those too? Are they able to read on level but not spell on grade level? What about sight words? Do they know a word on one page and not on another page? I'm looking for all of those things, and I would base the severity, whether it's mild to moderate to severe to profound, based on those findings. I'm not sure how else to answer that, Peter. Do you have any?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It is a great question.
Some doctors and psychologists actually who do official diagnoses of dyslexia will also give it a degree rating. So I have read reports from students before, and the doctor may say they have mild or profound, or actually rank it at a certain level. And I'm not sure if they all do that or if it's just certain ones, but I know that if you do end up seeking out an official diagnosis of dyslexia, they do sometimes give it a certain degree. And I should probably mention too, question we often get is about whether an official diagnosis is necessary to get remediation. And in fact, it's not. I would say that probably the most likely reason people seek out an official diagnosis is that they need to get accommodations at school and they want it to actually be listed in an IEP, for example. So if you notice that your child is struggling and they just show all the signs of dyslexia, you can easily get help for them without having to get a diagnosis first.
Right. And oftentimes on an IEP, it will say specific learning disability.
Yeah.
And it will not say dyslexia. Although there's an asterisk beside it, and if you look in the law, the legal jargon is that dyslexia is among those specific learning disabilities.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have another good question here. So it can be diagnosed also later, even though reading got better. That's a great question. So whether dyslexia can still be diagnosed at later ages, even though reading has improved. And I've definitely seen cases of this myself. So you definitely can diagnose dyslexia at any age. Mm-hmm. One thing we've noticed is that when students have developed a lot of coping mechanisms, when you're diagnosing dyslexia at a later age, you really have to pay attention to those. So sometimes we work with students who are teenagers and haven't gotten any help for their dyslexia. And what we notice is that they have memorized everything. So every single word they see, they've memorized. But when we give them particularly complicated words or nonsense words, they are not able to read them because they don't know phonetic rules and syllable rules. So, exactly. Yeah. So would you add anything to that, Nancy?
No, I agree with you.
So yeah, definitely can be diagnosed at any age, but sometimes you need to look for some different aspects depending on what age the student is at.
Also, if they've had intervention, you can still diagnose, you can still screen for it, but you have to know how far they've gotten in their intervention so that you can take that into account as you're looking at the severity.
Absolutely. Yep. Let's see. Oh, this is a good question. What is the best way to help a child learn to write and study spelling words? So we've all seen those spelling word lists, right? And they often have no rhyme or reason for the actual phonetic sounds that the student's learning. So would you like to offer any advice on that, Nancy?
If your student is in a program like Peter offers through Dyslexia Connect, I would highly recommend that the spelling list at the school be replaced with spelling list from what they're learning in a structured program, in an Orton Gillingham structured program. So if they are at the point where they're learning short A closed syllable words, that's what they should be spelling on Fridays for their spelling test. Now, if the teacher doesn't agree with that, or if it causes embarrassment for the student can go ahead and take the test and it just not be graded, just so he's not ostracized in front of his peers. But I would try to work with, I mean, the tutor can send them home or email them to the teacher, the words that go along with that lesson. So a good Wharton Gillingham program is going to be teaching the spelling alongside the reading at the same time. They're simultaneous. That's my recommendation. It doesn't always happen. So you have to do the best you can if the school won't go along with that. But just make sure that your child, if it's your personal child, knows that you are not going to be angry with him or her for getting the words incorrect. They might get them all right on the spelling test, but when they try to use them the next week, they're going to probably miss them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, Nancy. You know, sometimes you want to make that effort to get things changed at school, but at the bare minimum, you can consistently tell your child that you are not going to get angry at them when they struggle, and that you understand what they're going through, because that support at home is a huge factor.
Right.
Very, very important. So I've got a question from Megan. Megan was asking if our Tutoring at Dyslexia Connect is still effective if their son has dyslexia, dysgraphia, slow processing speed, and ADHD inattentive type. So that's a great question. We're actually very familiar with working with students who have multiple issues like that. We have a large number of students who have dyslexia and ADHD. In fact, those things often go together. And also the other issues you mentioned as well. So we are very familiar with working with students who have multiple conditions like that coexisting. Absolutely. Let me see if we have any other questions or comments here. Another question about spelling tests. So we addressed that one. Okay. So a question from Aaron here. What is the best way to help a child that reverses the letters B and D while both writing and reading?
I use a trick with the hand, and so if I'm looking at my hand this way, when I'm looking at it is either a B or a D, right? So I'm going to use, if I'm writing with my right hand, I want to use my left hand because I want to write and use my hand at the same time. Okay. So I'm writing with my right hand, using my left hand. When I look at my hand, it's a B. So you can see it that way too. It's a B. Balloons go up in the air. If I hold it this way, pigs go down in the mud. So if I know that if the stick is up and I hold it up with my left hand, balloon, if it's not going that way, then I know it's the other one that goes up and it's a D. All right. So if I see it, this is really hard to do over the computer. I could do it better in person. So that helps with the B-D confusion. I've seen people do the bed. The head of the bed is the B, the foot of the bed is the D, but then that takes both of my hands. I still want to be able to write. And so I can just flip up my hand and check B and D. And I can tell you that I sometimes still have to do this. If I'm tired or if I'm sick, I can't remember my B and D. So I have to do that myself, just like with my left and right. So if you hold it to yourself and you look at it with your thumb up, balloons go up in the air. If it doesn't look like a balloon, then it's a d. Okay. That's how you know the difference when you're writing and when you're reading. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's an excellent trick. Actually, we use that with a lot of our students as well, putting the hand up to see which letter that is. And it's something that the student always has on them, of course, which is great. They got the hands with them at all times, and they're able to just put it up and look at it and verify that way. So that's a really effective tool for that. So yeah, excellent. Well, I think we're going to have one more question here and then wrap up for the day. And I wanted to say, if we didn't get a chance to address your question today, feel free to message me on Facebook, on our Dyslexia Connect Facebook page, and I would be happy to answer additional questions that you have. So if we didn't get a chance to answer them today, we'd be happy to answer those still. So this is a great question. Our daughter was just approved for an IEP today. What are the most important goals we have them use for her in relation to assistance with math and reading supports with dyslexia?
That's a huge,
great question. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to make the goals attainable. You want to make them, they have to be a SMART goal. So the S would, you want to make sure that they're attainable, that they're measurable. And now I'm losing track of what the S, M, A, R, and T all stand for, that they're timely. You want to make sure that there aren't too many, and you want to make sure that they are fine-tuned. When you go to your IEP meeting, I highly recommend that you sign the paper that says you've been at the meeting, but then you take it home and ponder it before you say, yes, implement this. And I mean, it's hard to tell you exactly what you want on your IEP when you don't know. I don't know the child and where the child is. But whatever they ask for or whatever they set goals for, they're accountable for. And so you want to hold them accountable. And too many goals is just overwhelming. I would be happy to answer your question about your specific child on a one-on-one basis, just because in this forum, I don't know your child well enough to answer that question. But I would certainly be happy to.
Yeah, IEPs definitely get very, very complex and vary a lot from student to student. As far as keeping track of anything, I've heard parents remark before that it's even hard to keep track of all the information related to an IEP. And one great recommendation I've seen is actually keeping all the information in a binder.
Yeah.
So you just have an IEP binder at home and you keep all the documents related to the IEP in there. You can also print out emails and put those in the IEP binder as well. And for the specific correspondence, you can actually have that dated as well. If you want to be able to look back and say like, well, here's a message we received regarding the IEP in August. Here's one from September. And so that's a great way to be able to keep track of everything. So
and another thing I would recommend at an IEP meeting, when you have that binder, I love that idea, Peter. And I would keep everything just in chronological order. I wouldn't in little sections, just in chronological order, so it reads like a book. And on the cover, put a picture of your child, because often you have people at the IEP meetings who don't even know your child. They just have to fill a seat. That doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does. And we want to remember that we're talking about a child, a real person, and this is your real person. So have a picture there to remind them. Have pictures of things that your child likes to be doing. If your child's a skateboarder, have an action picture of your child on a skateboard, whatever it is, so that we know that it's a real person with real struggles.
That's a great idea. Anything you can do to personalize the experience is really going to help, because it's just gonna help your child's personality be part of the process and help the process seem less detached from the fact that, like Nancy was saying, this is actually about a person, and this is our child, and this is what we're doing this work for and having this meeting for. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much for attending today, everyone. Thank you so much, Nancy. That was a fantastic presentation. And as I mentioned, if you have any other questions that were not answered yet, feel free to message me off of our Dyslexia Connect Facebook page, and I would be happy to answer those questions for you. And we will be posting the video of this event on Facebook in the next few days, so you can look for that as well. So thank you, everybody, for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.